Everyone laughed when Adaeze married a humble delivery boy, thinking he was just another ordinary man. But little did they know he was hiding a shocking secret. He's a billionaire. Watch how he silenced everyone with the truth and turned their world upside down. Before we dive into this unforgettable tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Luxury Tales by SK family. Subscribe now, and let's begin this incredible journey together. Adaeze was at home, preparing for another evening of relaxation after a long week of work. She had ordered a few books online, something to keep her occupied over the weekend. When the doorbell rang, she wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But when she opened the door, she found Emeka standing there, holding the package in his hands. She recognized him immediately, the delivery man who had been bringing her parcels for the past couple of weeks. Unlike the other delivery men, Emeka wasn't dressed in the usual company uniform. Instead, he wore simple clothes, a faded t-shirt and jeans that looked worn, yet somehow well-fitted. His eyes met hers briefly, and for a moment, there was a stillness between them. "Your package, ma'am," he said, his voice low and calm. Adaeze thanked him, about to close the door when something stopped her. There was a familiarity about him, something that made her pause. Most delivery men didn't look her in the eye, but Emeka did. His gaze held an air of quiet confidence, unlike anyone she'd ever met. "Are you okay?" she asked, surprised by the question coming out of her mouth. Emeka nodded, offering a small smile. "Just tired from a long day." He started to turn to leave, but Adaeze found herself watching him go. There was a peculiar calmness about him that stood out, something she couldn't quite place. The next day, Emeka showed up again. This time, he was carrying another package for her. She noticed how he carefully adjusted his delivery bag before approaching her door. Again, their eyes met. "You're always so quiet," Adaeze said, trying to make conversation. "Do you like your job?" Emeka shrugged. "It's just a job, Adaeze, nothing special." His response was simple, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with her. She had heard all kinds of stories about men like him, people who worked hard but never seemed to get ahead. Yet Emeka didn't seem like the kind of man who would ever complain about his lot in life. As he left, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to him, something he wasn't revealing. And as much as she tried to dismiss it, the thought lingered. She had met countless men before, all from wealthy families, men who lived in mansions and drove expensive cars. But Emeka, he was different. There was a quiet depth to him that was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Little did Adaeze know, the man standing at her door was hiding a secret, one that could turn her world upside down. And it was a secret he would soon reveal, leaving everyone, especially her, speechless. As the days passed, Adaeze couldn't stop thinking about Emeka. Each time he showed up to deliver another package, she felt an unexpected thrill that she couldn't explain. His quiet presence had an effect on her. He wasn't like the men in her circle. He didn't boast about his wealth or status, and he didn't try to impress her with flashy displays. He was simply there. And for some reason, that made her wonder. Emeka's visits had started to feel like something more than just deliveries. Adaeze would catch herself looking out the window for his arrival, her heart skipping a beat when she saw him walking up to her door. There was something about his steady, purposeful strides that piqued her curiosity. He didn't look like the typical delivery guy, not in the way he held himself, not in the calm assurance he radiated despite his modest appearance. On one particular evening, when Emeka arrived with a delivery just as she was about to leave for a dinner with friends, Adaeze decided to take a different approach. She invited him in, offering him a seat and a drink, hoping to see beyond the facade of the delivery man. "Do you live around here?" she asked, trying to start a conversation. She had to know more about him. Emeka hesitated for a moment before responding, his eyes briefly flicking toward the window as if considering his words carefully. "Not far," he replied simply. "Just working, getting by." Adaeze nodded, trying not to appear too eager. There was something off about his answer, too vague, too let it go. Maybe he just didn't want to share much. She didn't want to push him, but she couldn't help herself. The mystery of Emeka had begun to intrigue her in a way that was both exciting and frustrating. "You're always so calm," she said, her voice soft as she studied him. "Most people get excited or nervous about their jobs, but you seem unaffected. Is that just who you are?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've learned to be patient, Adazi. Patience is key." His words hung in the air, leaving an unexpected tension in the room. Adaze couldn't quite place it, but she felt like she was being drawn into something much larger than what it appeared to be. Why was he so guarded? Why didn't he share more about his life? As he finished the drink she offered and stood to leave, something shifted in her. She couldn't just let him walk away without asking one last question. "Emeka, what's your story? Where are you really from? What do you really do?" she asked, her voice slightly more insistent than she intended. For a long moment, he didn't answer. His eyes met hers, but there was no warmth, no sign of emotion. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told you, Adazi, I'm just a delivery man, nothing more." But Adazi wasn't convinced. As she closed the door behind him, a strange feeling washed over her. This man was hiding something. She didn't know why, and she didn't know how, but she could sense it in the way he carried himself, in the way he avoided her questions. The excitement she felt in his presence had shifted into something deeper, something closer to suspicion. Adazi couldn't help herself. She had to know more. There was no way someone like Emeka could be so ordinary and yet so captivating. Was he hiding his true identity? Or was there something else, something darker, that he wasn't ready to reveal? The tension grew within her, and she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let it go until she uncovered the truth. Days turned into weeks, and Adaz's obsession with Emeka only grew stronger. Every time he showed up at her doorstep, the questions that had been building in her mind resurfaced. Why was he so secretive? Why did he act like he was just an ordinary delivery guy when there were so many signs pointing to something far more extravagant? There was something about Emeka that felt like a puzzle she couldn't solve, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more she found herself pulled in. One evening after a delivery, she stood in the doorway watching Emeka walk away, his back straight and purposeful. She couldn't hold it in any longer. "Emeka, wait," she called out. He stopped and turned, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're hiding, but I can't keep pretending that I don't notice something's off," Adazi said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "I see the way you carry yourself. I see the things you have, your phone, your watch, your car. They don't match who you claim to be." Emeka sighed, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he seemed like he was about to speak, but then he shook his head, his eyes downcast. "Adazi, it's not what you think. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she challenged. "You've been so careful about hiding things. Why? What are you running from?" Emeka's gaze shifted, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made Adazi's breath catch. He stepped closer, his tone lower now. "I'm not running, Adazi. I'm protecting you." "Protecting me?" Adazi echoed, the confusion rising. "From what? I don't need protecting. I just want to know who you really are." For a long moment, the silence between them felt thick. Emeka's eyes seemed to pierce through her, searching for the right words. "I didn't want you to love me for the wrong reasons," he finally said, his voice soft but firm. "I didn't want you to fall for my money, my status. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have." The words hit Adaze like a ton of bricks. For the first time, Emeka's vulnerability was clear. He wasn't just hiding his wealth, he was hiding his true self, afraid that she might not accept him if she knew the truth. But there was something deeper in his words, something that made her question everything she had believed about him. "Who are you really, Emeka?" Adazi asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before he could answer, the sound of a car screeching to a halt outside her building broke the moment. Adazi looked out the window and saw a sleek black limousine parked in front. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, and his gaze immediately landed on Emeka. The tension in the air thickened. Adazi's heart began to pound as the stranger approached, his eyes never leaving Emeka. There was an air of authority about him, as if he owned the city. He stopped right in front of Emeka, his gaze sharp, almost interrogating. "Emeka," the man said, his voice cold and calculating, "we need to talk." Emeka's face hardened at the sound of his name, his posture shifting from calm to rigid. Adazi watched in confusion as Emeka stood still, not saying a word. The stranger turned his eyes to her, giving her a slight, almost mocking nod before addressing Emeka once more. Don't make me repeat myself. We need to have a serious conversation now. Adiazi stood frozen, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why did Emeka look so uncomfortable? Something told her this was no coincidence, that whatever Emeka was hiding, it was far bigger than she could imagine. Emeka, Adiazi said, her voice shaking slightly. Who is he? But Emeka didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes soft yet filled with regret. I never wanted you to find out like this, he murmured, but now you're too involved. The man in the suit's impatient voice cut through the air again. Enough with the games, Emeka. Time is running out. Emeka's shoulders slumped as he turned toward the man, the tension in his body giving way to a reluctant surrender. Adiazi's heart raced as she realized that this was just the beginning of the truth, and she had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Her curiosity and unease blended into a storm of emotions. She needed answers. She had to know who Emeka really was, no matter the consequences. The man in the suit, who had been so imposing just moments before, turned his attention fully to Adiazi now. His gaze was cold, almost calculating. The silence between them felt suffocating as Emeka stood frozen, his eyes avoiding Adiazi's. Adiazi, Emeka finally spoke, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable weight. You've heard enough now, haven't you? She blinked, the confusion on her face obvious. She was trying to make sense of everything. Her feelings for Emeka, the man in the suit, the limo, and the mounting tension in the air. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a guy who happened to be more complicated than he seemed. No, this was something bigger. Something that was threatening to unravel everything she thought she knew about the world. I need answers, Emeka, Adiazi said, her voice rising slightly. Why didn't you just tell me? What is all this about? She looked at the man in the suit again, her mind spinning. The man's demeanor was so composed, so sure of himself, as though everything around him, everything that was happening, was well within his control. The man's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps it's time you understand exactly what's going on, Adiz. He turned to Emeka. I'll let you explain the rest. Emeka's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, Adizi saw a flicker of something in his expression. Something raw, something torn. It was as though the weight of whatever he had been carrying for so long had become unbearable. Adiz, I never wanted you to be part of this world, Emeka said, his voice trembling slightly. But the truth is, I'm not just a delivery man. I'm not even close. I'm one of the largest investors in Lagos, my family's business. It's worth billions, and I've been hiding it from you because I didn't want you to love me for my money. Adizi's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a tidal wave, crashing through everything she thought she knew. The man in the suit wasn't just some stranger. He was part of Emeka's world. But why? Adizi whispered, the question barely escaping her lips. Why would you hide something like that from me? Emeka took a deep breath, his face pale as he met her eyes. Because I didn't want to be that man, the one with the wealth, the power, the connections. I wanted you to see me, the real me. Not the image of a billionaire who gets everything handed to him. I wanted you to see the person I am beneath all that, not the money, not the business. He paused as though the weight of his confession was too much to carry all at once. I didn't want you to love me for my family's empire, for the flashy cars or the private jets. I wanted you to love me for the man who delivers packages, who lives a simple life, who doesn't flaunt anything. Because when I'm with you, I'm just Emeka. That's all I want to be. Adizi felt a rush of emotions hit her. The revelation tore through her, unraveling all the walls she'd built around herself, all the preconceived notions about love and relationships. She had always imagined that wealth and status were the key to happiness, that she could only be with someone who could offer her the world. But now, staring into Emeka's eyes, she realized how wrong she had been. But why didn't you just tell me? She asked, her voice cracking slightly, overwhelmed by the mix of anger, confusion, and something deeper, hurt. I would have loved you, Emeka. I never cared about your money. I cared about you. But you shut me out. You made me feel like I wasn't good enough to know the truth. Emeka's eyes softened, and he took a step closer to her. I didn't want to lose you, Adizi. I thought if you knew, You would never look at me the same way again. I didn't want you to think of me as just another wealthy man who could buy anything, because that's not who I am. I just wanted to be someone you could love for the right reasons." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. Daisy stood there, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind. The man who had been so secretive, so distant, had just poured his heart out. He had opened himself to her in a way she hadn't expected, revealing his vulnerability in the face of his own empire. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The revelation was overwhelming, but in some strange way it felt like the beginning of something new, something more real than the world she had always known. For the first time, Daisy realized that Emeka's wealth didn't define him. His heart did. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know." Emeka nodded, his gaze filled with a mix of relief and regret. "I didn't want you to, but now, I just need you to know the truth." The man in the suit, who had been standing in the background, finally spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Enough of this," he said, stepping forward. "There's more to this than you both realize, but that can wait. Emeka, we have business to attend to. Adaeze, you're involved now, whether you like it or not." Adaeze's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face the stranger. The storm inside her only deepened as she realized that this was just the beginning. The truth about Emeka had been revealed, but there was so much more yet to unfold. The days following the revelation were filled with a strange, unsettling calmness. Emeka had given Adaeze the truth, exposing the secret life he had worked so hard to shield her from. Yet the full weight of that truth hung heavy in the air, and every glance, every word seemed to carry the unspoken question of what came next. Adaeze spent those first few days in a daze, the shock still reverberating through her. She had wanted the truth, but now that she had it, she was uncertain of how to move forward. She had always believed that love was built on honesty, on transparency. But Emeka had hidden so much: his wealth, his connections, the darkness lurking behind the life he had carefully crafted. She had trusted him, and now she was left questioning everything. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Adaeze couldn't deny that her feelings for him hadn't changed. There was a part of her that understood why Emeka had kept this part of himself hidden. He hadn't wanted to burden her with his complicated world. He had hoped that their love would be enough, that she would see him, not his wealth or status. But now that the truth was out, Adaeze realized how much of a sacrifice it had been for him to keep his life a secret. Emeka had tried to protect her, but now they were both caught in the web of his past. The man in the suit, Emeka's business associate, or perhaps someone far more dangerous, had made it clear that there was no going back. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. In the quiet moments between them, Emeka would hold Adaeze close, whispering assurances that he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. But even he seemed uncertain, knowing the threat that loomed over them both. The people he had been running from were relentless, and now, with Adaeze involved, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Adaeze could see the weight of the situation on Emeka's face, the burden of his past pressing down on him. He had been trapped in a world of power, greed, and deceit, no matter how much he had tried to distance himself. The more he shared with her, the more she understood the complexity of his position. But in those moments, she saw something else in him, something that made her heart ache. He was scared. Scared not just for himself, but for her. She had always been told that love was a beautiful, effortless thing. But now, standing next to Emeka, Adaeze realized that love wasn't simple. It was messy, painful, and filled with hard choices. And the hardest choice of all was now upon them. Would she walk away from it all, or would she stand by him, knowing the dangers they faced? Emeka had already made his choice. He had chosen her, despite the chaos that surrounded them. But Adaeze was still grappling with her own feelings. Could she truly love a man who had been living a lie, even if it was to protect her? Could she face the future with him, knowing that the past was never truly behind them? "I've always been afraid of this moment," Emeka said one night, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But now that it's here, I don't know how to make it right. I just want to keep you safe." Adaeze stood silent, her mind racing. She could feel the love they had built together, still strong despite the cracks that had formed. But the road ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Yet in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't walk away. Love wasn't about avoiding the hard truths. It was about facing them together. "Then we face it together," Adeyezi said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "I'm not leaving you, Emeka. No matter what happens, I'm here. We'll figure this out." The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge. Adeyezi had made her decision. She would stand by Emeka no matter the cost. But the true test was still ahead. There was no turning back from this world, and the danger they faced was only just beginning. As the days stretched on, the clock was ticking. The man in the suit had given Emeka 1 hour to make a decision. The countdown had begun, and Adeyezi knew that the choice they made would define their future. But whatever came next, they would face it together, because love in its truest form was worth every risk. The tension in the room seemed to crackle, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. Adeze stood frozen, her heart racing as the stranger in the suit stepped closer, his gaze now fixed entirely on her. Emeka was silent beside her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and helplessness, as if he were powerless to stop what was unfolding. "Adeyezi, you have to understand," Emeka finally said, his voice a low murmur. "This is bigger than us. It's not just about money or status anymore. You're part of something now, something I tried so hard to protect you from." The man in the suit nodded, a dark glint in his eyes. "She's right. Whether she likes it or not, she's already tangled in this web." Adeyezi's pulse quickened, the pieces of the puzzle she had been trying to put together now falling into place. It wasn't just about Emeka's wealth. It wasn't even about the luxury he had hidden from her. No, there was something far more sinister at play here. The stranger in the suit wasn't just a business associate. He was a part of the empire Emeka had been shielding her from. "You're involved in something illegal, aren't you?" Adeyezi's voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Emeka's eyes darkened, and he clenched his fists. "It's not like that, Adeyezi. It's complicated. I didn't want you to know because I didn't want you to get hurt." The man in the suit stepped forward, brushing past Emeka without a second glance. His cold smile never faltered as he addressed Adeyezi. "You're smart, Adeyezi. You've figured it out. The business deals, the power, the connections. It's all tied to a much darker world. Emeka is trying to pull away, trying to escape it, but there are consequences. Consequences that affect both of you now." "Escape," Adeyezi repeated, feeling a mix of disbelief and fear. "What do you mean, escape?" Emeka ran a hand through his hair, his expression tortured. "I was involved in some things that I couldn't get out of. The business, the investments, they're all tied to people who won't let go, and now you're caught in the crossfire because of me." The stranger smiled again, almost pityingly. "Emeka thinks he can just walk away from it all, but that's not how it works. We've come to collect what's ours. And unfortunately for you, Adeyezi, you're a part of this now. You've seen too much." Adeyezi felt her chest tighten, panic threatening to overwhelm her. "What do you mean, collect? What do you want from me?" The man's gaze grew colder, sharper. "We're not here for you, Adeyezi. We're here because Emeka tried to pull away from something far bigger than him. He thinks he can walk away from the life he's built, but no one walks away from us. Not without consequences." Adiz felt her world tilt, the ground beneath her feet suddenly uncertain. This wasn't just about Emeka's hidden wealth anymore. It was about something dangerous, something that she had unwittingly become entangled in. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit. This wasn't just a man with a secret life. This was a man who had been running from a world filled with dangerous people who controlled everything. And now, she was part of that world, whether she liked it or not. Emeka stepped forward, his face strained with regret and determination. "I should have told you from the beginning, but now that you know, you're in danger, and I won't let anything happen to you." Suddenly, the stranger's demeanor changed. He moved swiftly, his hand reaching into his coat. For a moment, Adeyezi thought he was going to do something far worse. But then he pulled out a phone and tossed it to Emeka. "You have 1 hour," the man said coldly. 1 hour to decide. If you want to keep her safe, you'll have to make a choice. Do what we want or face the consequences. And trust me, Emeka, there will be consequences." Emeka caught the phone, his hands shaking. He turned to Adeyezi, his face a mix of desperation and resolve. I have to do this for you, for us. But before he could say another word, the man in the suit spoke again, his voice final. Remember, Emeka, no one gets out. No one. The door slammed shut behind him as he left, leaving a silence that was more suffocating than anything Adaeze had ever experienced. The world she thought she understood had just crumbled, and in its place there was only uncertainty, fear, and the feeling of being trapped in a world she never chose. Emeka turned to her, his eyes filled with pain. I never wanted this for you, but now you're part of this world, too. Adaeze's mind reeled, the final twist of her journey starting to take shape. She had fallen in love with a man who was running from a dangerous world, but now she wasn't just an outsider looking in. She was inside it, bound by the truth and by the choices that had been made long before she ever entered the picture. The question was no longer who Emeka was, but who they both would become in the face of what lay ahead. As the days passed, Adaeze found herself standing at a crossroads, caught between the life she once knew and the dangerous, uncertain world she had been pulled into. Emeka had made his choice, and so had she. But as much as she wanted to understand him, to walk beside him through the chaos that had engulfed them both, she couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper they went, the harder it would be to return to any semblance of normalcy. The phone call, the threats, the shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their lives, these were no longer distant possibilities. They were real. And now Adaeze was in this world too, whether she liked it or not. She had wanted the truth, had longed to see Emeka for who he really was. But in uncovering that truth, she had exposed herself to a darkness she hadn't been prepared for. And yet, amidst all the fear and uncertainty, there was something undeniable, something that hadn't changed no matter what secrets had been revealed. Her love for Emeka. It wasn't for his wealth or his power, but for the man she had seen behind the facade. He had made mistakes, hidden his life from her, but he had done it out of love, not selfishness. As she stood in front of the window, looking out at the city that had become both their prison and their home, Adaeze realized something. Life wasn't about the things they could control. It was about the choices they made in the face of the unknown. And now, with Emeka by her side, she had to decide. Would she let fear define her, or would she embrace the love that had brought her here, knowing the dangers that lay ahead? The answer was clear. She would face it all, because the only thing stronger than the darkness they were in was the love they had found. And that, she knew, was enough to guide them both through whatever came next.